Hello, everybody. Welcome on this first interview. So can you please put on a comment of the YouTube channel that you can see us and you can hear us?
I can see us and I can hear us.
Me too.
So apparently we are live now on the YouTube channel on For Me of Change, For Me du Changement, Ends of Change in English. So welcome everybody. We have 21 person connected just right now. So for the person who will join this live after the live, so you can advance during perhaps 1 or 2 minutes to have the starting point of the conference of the talk. You can see us and you can hear us perfect. So welcome everybody for this first interview of Marilyn Euler and James Wiggle that we welcome here to talk about the origin about facilitation. And we have also Lan Levy who is with us, and she will be your interviewer, and I will be Nicolas Verdeau, the person who will record the questions that you have and that you want to ask to these two wonderful persons. So we will perhaps wait 1 or 2 more minutes to see if some person still want to connect. Can you please share on the comments on the YouTube where are you from? Where are you from around the world? Put the name of your country and perhaps the city where you are from, please.
Significant delay.
So,
Is a significant delay.
yeah, we have some minutes of delay.
Oh,
So some person say already, thank you for doing this interview. Great.
can you ask someone so to say who they
Okay.
are and
So
where
we
they
have,
from?
yeah, we have people from France, Nice. We have people from Ecuador, from Paris, from Germany, Hamburg, Dallas, Manchester in UK, from India, from south of France, from north of Carolina, USA, from Belgium. We have now 33% connected to the channel, so please put where you're from on the comments. You can put also where you're from and what you are doing, what's your job.
Okay. And should we start now or should we wait a little bit more? Maybe
Perhaps
one
a
more
little
minute?
bit more, yes, because we have, I can see that the counter of person is still increasing. So perhaps
Okay.
just a few minutes. We have also people from Nice, Lyon, Bordeaux, also in France. Great. And because we have a delay, sometimes like 2 or 3 minutes of delay.
Mary D'Souza is on, Marilyn.
Yes, people from Dallas also, Texas. France, south of France, perfect. So welcome everybody. We have people who are facilitator, coach, facilitator, perfect. Okay. So we will start this first interview. So I will let you the floor, Lan, if you're ready, if both of you are ready. Great.
Thank you, Nicola.
You're welcome.
Welcome everybody. My name is Lan Levy, and I had a chance to meet James and Marilyn Euler 15 years ago. And that's where I started to learn, really to learn about facilitation and being a facilitator. And with the confinement and the lockdown due to the COVID, actually, that is quite interesting. That is something that is seem to disconnect people, and actually is the way the other way around, because it reconnect us all over the world. So we have the ambition of creating a global learning network. And this interview is one of the first of the series of interview to connect the people who are using facilitation on who are facilitator now together, so that we can learn together and we maybe find a way to cope with the future better together. So we are really happy to have here Marilyn Euler and James Grieger from the US. They are the one who somehow, I don't know in what context, that's what we are going to discover now, that they started facilitations in a way and created the first set of facilitation methods. So let's, get to know them first. So Marilyn, can you introduce yourself? What did you do and where did you start it?
Sure. Yeah. I was born and raised in a small town in Minnesota. I went to college to become a math teacher. So in the summer before I graduated from college, I went to the inner city in Chicago. So that was in 1965. It was a time of great racial tensions in the United States. My small town in Minnesota had diversity, like whether you were Lutheran or Presbyterian. That was it. We had very, very limited diversity in my town. So we had Native Americans, and we had, like I said, a lot of white people from Northern Europe. So I decided to go to the inner city in Chicago to teach school. And in that choice, I came across the Ecumenical Institute, or later it became the Institute of Cultural Affairs. So I started in my work with the Institute of Cultural Affairs and the Ecumenical Institute as a math teacher, and spent many years with the ICA, actually more than 50 years working with them. Half of that was as a volunteer, volunteering in the United States, but also in Asia, in the Marshall Islands, in Japan, in Hong Kong, in Germany, and Nigeria, and Kenya. So that was about 15 years. And all of that time I was teaching math, and also as a way to earn money, because you can get a job teaching math any place in the world, mostly. So that's how I was able to support our family so we could be volunteers. So at the same time, I worked with the Institute to deliver some programs, and we can talk more about those programs and how they got started. I will just confess that Jim and I did not write these methods. They were already crafted and then recrafted and evolved more as we go along. But when I came to the Institute of Cultural Affairs and the Ecumenical Institute, they had already started working with many of the methods that we currently use today. I think that's where I'll stop, unless something else, and pass this to Jim, I guess.
Thank you, Marilyn. James. Yeah. So
somewhat of a similar story I have. I did a brief internship with the what was then the Ecumenical Institute in 1967, and never really looked back. Maybe I would say my journey started with a newspaper article in December of 1964 by a well-known science fiction writer called Ray Bradbury. That was that was entitled God on Tomorrow Morning, in which he celebrated the first satellites. I don't know if, I guess you all would not remember that, would you? The first time the satellites were put up around the Earth, and they were going beep, 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 and it was so strange. But he used imagery from the Western tradition and talked about the days of creation from the book of Genesis and said, we are living on the morning sill of the 9th day of creation, and it will be our greatest yet. And that grabbed my heart, that I wanted to be involved in something important, something significant. My father worked his whole life at a steel mill and gave himself to form a family and a house. And I knew when I was 18, that was not enough for me. And so this came along, and then I found in this strange group of people living on the west side of Chicago, a group of people who are serious. If you think to yourself, if you've ever co-facilitated, and there you are trying to figure out what to do and trying to plan things and checking between sessions, and it's so focused and it's so engaging and exciting, and it was like that. But it was like that every day, trying to figure out the next step, trying to listen to people, trying to help people. It was just like that. And a big part of what was exciting in starting with the Institute, they had a course on theology. And it started off and it said, say your name and what is one thing that grounds you in history?
Wow.
So how many
What a
facilitators
question.
still go, let's go around, say your name. And it was so different than anything I had ever encountered, because I was being asked to participate, to jump in. And then we would study these complicated papers. And we would be asked to diagram the paper and what was in the paper. And then they would ask one of us participants to get up and put on the board what we came up with. And instead of the teacher doing it, and I was caught. Here was an opportunity to be engaged. And of course, like Marilyn, oh, I was such a sweet little boy. I could send you pictures. I was such a sweet little boy. And I lived so isolated from the rest of the world. It was just amazing. And so having a chance to experience the complexity of the city, to live among people whose skin color and language was different than mine was just thrilling, just thrilling. But anyway, that was, and like Marilyn said, I think the idea of having methods that would allow you to deeply engage people, that was in place when we came. Over the course of our time together, then I think they've grown and developed. Then I'm complete.
Thank you. You may not know, but actually that here represent, several sequence of learning actually started with Marilyn, and then Marilyn somehow teach James, if I understand well. Jim teach me, I teach Nicola. So it's like a learning path already is presented here. I would love to hear, Marilyn, where did you start it? And you discover that the word facilitation, do you know where does it come from? In what context, and how do you receive it when you started working?
Well, I'm going to jump ahead a few years. So like I said, we started working with these methods in the Ecumenical Institute, working with local churches, working with schools. We designed a class for schools. We had a method we called the remaneuver method, which you would turn around now and call action planning. We had something we called the art form method. Now you would hear it as focused conversation. So there were methods that we used in the local community. We were totally engaged in the community we lived in on the west side of Chicago. I taught at the high school. Jim taught at the elementary school in that community. Every night, the teachers would meet and talk about what we were doing in our class, how we used these methods, how we were about changing images of the students, on and on. So we used them all along, but we didn't call them facilitation methods. In 1986, one of our colleagues wrote the book Winning Through Participation and introduced the word, thank you, Jim, the technology of participation. So we started calling it technology of participation. We began working with it and calling it facilitation. So now I'm going to say that the role I started to play then, I told you already, I taught mathematics for years and years. I came back to the US after all of that time outside the country and decided I wanted to do something else than teach school. And so I started to work with facilitation. Part of my colleagues, part of that group had already developed ways to transfer these skills. And so I decided to go to graduate school and do organizational development, and I had to have a thesis, shucks. So I said, all right, I'm going to take these methods, these ways that people are transferring the skills. I'm going to put them in a manual, and I'm going to write an instructor's manual. I'm going to send it out to people who are co-inventors. And then we're going to start training it. And so to make a long story short, for the next 25, 30 years, my job was convening. Jim's doing a show and tell for us. That was the first form of, actually the first form of the manual was just photocopied. Then this one. He'll come up with the next one soon. Anyway, they just kept evolving. In my understanding, that's when we started to call it facilitation in about the 90s, late 80s and 90s. And we started to really work on what is the stance of a facilitator and what are the methodologies and how can we transfer those skills. So then we had to make the skills more obvious. We had to make the steps more clear. I will confess, the first time I facilitated was in Nigeria for an oil company. I got in front of the room, I collected all the cards, and I go, now what? I was working with a team, so someone saved me, but it wasn't that clear what the steps were. So anyway, that's what we worked on. We created a large training team, about 120 people in the US who were working as trainers. Some had never heard of the Ecumenical Institute or the Institute of Cultural Affairs, but they did know about organizations and organizational change, and they needed these methods. So that's a thumbnail shot, a snapshot of how it became facilitation. The word was chosen because facilitate means to make it easy. So that's what we were trying to do, is to assist, to engage. Same thing we've been doing all along, engaging people in authentic conversation and planning. And now we were working with not just local neighborhoods or communities or local churches, but now we were working with organizations, with nonprofits, with corporations, on and on. I'm going to stop there. You're saying thank you for stopping. Go ahead, Jim.
James, actually, what I love is that you are both teacher before being a facilitator. So for you, Jim, facilitation, what is different from the teaching? How do you use both of that? And then, facilitations and teaching, when you first approach facilitation, how does it change the way that you do teaching? And I see that there's some question from the participant here. I will that go with it later on, but I hear you.
Maybe just put a coda in before I sneak into answering your questions. So basically from 1965 to 1989 or so, there was this strange group. We called ourselves different names. Some people say it was a cult. We didn't think it was a cult, but who knows? That was intent on changing the world. And our idea for changing the world was that people in every community, grassroots people in every community, would take responsibility for what was happening in their community and would deal with it. And our job was to figure out a way this could happen and spread it all over the world, okay? And so that meant we talked about ourselves as a research, demonstration, and training group. Research meant we took it upon ourselves to figure out, not only in our mind, but in our heart and our body, what was really going on and what was needed. Demonstration meant we tried to put upon ourselves to be a living example of how to do these things. So Marilyn's stories of going different places in the world, supporting yourself, not being dependent on grants and all that sort of thing. And then training, that once we demonstrated how to do this, then we would train other people, which now if you think about the group facilitation methods, we demonstrate the method and then you get a chance to practice it. So it's that method has still been there. By the time when Marilyn was talking about creating the course, we were fairly clear that anyone who had been on the staff of the Institute or part of, we called ourselves the Order Ecumenical, or part of this for 15 or 20 years could use these methods. However, that didn't seem like a very good way to proceed into the future to make a difference in the whole world. And so Marilyn came up with the assumption, suppose you didn't have to spend 30 years of your life working as a volunteer. Is there a way to transfer these methods more quickly? And hence was developed this group facilitation methods course. Now, when I was teaching, I only taught for 3 years. Now, I wasn't a very good grade school teacher, and I really had no training as a teacher, to be honest. But I needed a job to support myself to work with the Institute. And so I went to the local grade school that was desperate for teachers. And they said, sure, we'll hire you as a teacher. What I was good at was getting my class excited. We would sing songs, and I had beaded curtains, and we would rearrange the room. If you think still, conference rooms too often are the sage up in the front, and then all of the seats facing the fount of wisdom, a little bit like what this is now. It's kind of discouraging. Anyway, so I would rearrange so they could work as teams, and I would rearrange so they could dialogue back and forth like what we do in facilitation in many ways, and have them work. I was not very good at teaching reading. I'll just be honest. I was not very good at those basic things. Wilma Leverson one day looked at me with disgust and said, Mr. Weigel, you play too much. But now, and my wife's, we've been married almost 50 years, has been teaching school. It's pretty much the same thing. The issue is not better lectures, it's engaging the students. It's getting them, it's helping them develop the tools and take responsibility in their own lives to figure out how to forge ahead. So these days, I think you see a lot of that, though still the education piece is a little different. I think the other thing that I got from Marilyn early on is distinguishing between teaching and learning. And she used to say, you have to remember there's no direct relationship between you talking and them learning. Them learning is where you have to put your focus. So I don't know, did that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And actually, is there anything that Marilyn would add to that? Learning and teaching and facilitating, the relationship between them.
Well, one of the things we say now is that there are a lot of words out there now. There's facilitator, there's coach, there's consultant, there's trainer, there's the hierarchical leaders. So in the categories of leadership, there are many, many versions of it. The uniqueness of facilitation, I think, is that the task is for the facilitator to ask questions so that the group can come up with their solution. Most of the other methodologies are, I can play the role of a consultant or the role of a trainer where I am bringing my experience. Hopefully it's helpful to people. But when I'm facilitating, I don't have the answers. I have the questions. And so I think for me, that's a big part of what these methodologies have enabled us to do, is to find ways of going beyond just, what do you think? To structured way of going deeper in a conversation, to have questions that enable us to come up with a plan for the group to make their choices about where they want to go. So I think it's confused in many ways in the world now. People use those words all interchangeably. I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, I'm a consultant, I'm a counselor. For me, the important thing is the facilitator has questions and is about the task of engaging people in coming together around their solutions to the questions.
Thank you. There's now questions from Karin. What is different between, between mentoring and facilitating?
I'm sorry, the difference between what and facilitating?
Mentoring and facilitating.
I can say that as a mentor, I am very, very often facilitating a dialogue with the mentee. So it's one of those situations, however, that I am expected as a mentor to have experiences to share, wisdom to offer, but I only know what of that is relevant by the questions I ask, by the questions that are asked of me. So I think that the facilitation is a set of tools and a stance that says the person you're speaking with has the answer, not me. So the same in a mentor relationship, the person being mentored is making the choices, not me.
Okay.
Hopefully I have something I can share that's useful to them.
And I would add in, I think from the technology of participation perspective, we would tend to talk about group facilitation methods. And so oftentimes what we're after is helping a group of people more effectively understand what's going on and how to respond to it. Whereas, at least in my sense of things, mentoring is more of often a one-on-one kind of a situation. So I think that would be a little bit of a distinction. But I think it's also important to say this. We are still in the first half century of developing important ways to be actively engaged in our world. And it's messy. You are pioneers as much as we are, and the next generation is going to be pioneers. Just like everybody knows you have to set up a room with a podium in the front and chairs behind, one day they're going to know that's not how to do it. You have to have a sticky wall in front and so forth and so on. It's not supervising people, it's mentoring people. So we're all in a pioneering community that is still trying to give form and shape to better methods and approaches that are based more on people's responsibility, not just their doing what they're told.
There is Alan asked a question. I have been including the 5-minute versions of this talk in the facilitation training course I have run for the last 20 years. I've been hoping it is accurate. So far, my version is doing okay. So that's nice.
Alan Heckman, when Lon was getting her training in Phoenix, Alan was in charge of the kitchen at his grandmother's behest. And somehow got sucked into this training as, how do I say this? We know as facilitators that the question you ask is an important question, but we also know the way the room is set up is important, and the kind of snacks people have is significant, and the sort of meals we have, and this is a part of our craft, is to understand how we shape a whole environment for people that helps them be better, which then it pushes back on us, but we take a lot of responsibility. Why? Because we know that's what it takes to help people get better decisions and get better focus and move things ahead. Isn't that right?
I completely agree. Actually, that's what every time I facilitate, I take care of every detail. Actually, facilitation is a lot about detail. That is about the rooms, it's about how to invite people, how to welcome people, what is the process, and how to really, have the process. It's the fluidity is really important. It's how that is go through, it's so natural that it's the way it is. So yeah, it resonated a lot. Actually, I learned a lot from you guys when I was in 2005. I observe, I see all that. Actually, I learned it from you. I confirm it. I learned all that from you. I come back to the question that, because I would like to hear story, that things that you experience. That it's like we are talking like, I say in the invitation, like take a coffee or tea and then hear story. I'd like to hear a lot of story from you, actually. So the first, maybe starting in the in the part of story that you tell, Starman has questions. How are you grounded in his story, Jim? Because that is back to that, and then I'd like to see how that is translated in the action somehow. Some part of it that you see that it is grounded.
My name is James Weigel, and I am grounded in history because I have been fortunate to live so far in what has to be the most exciting and tumultuous time in our human history on this planet. I pinch myself to have been so lucky to have lived at this time in history.
And Jim, when you started and doing, you've been facilitating, teaching for about, I don't know, 30, 40 years now?
Longer than that, yes.
Longer than that. Can you tell us one or two experiences that it is really inspiring, remarkable to you? Either, it was a success, or either it's a learning opportunity that you had. That you say that, yeah, I am really proud in this story, and I want to change the world, because it's one thing that I also remark in the people working around facilitations are the people who want to change the world. So, that's one or two experience that you want to share with us.
Well, here's one. In 1973 or 74, we were part of an institute office in San Francisco in California. And one of the people in our office got a contract with the US Fish and Wildlife Service. Now you have to think back, this was the beginnings of the environmental movement. And Northern California especially has all these wonderful coastlines and wild spaces and rivers and stuff like that. And it has this huge logging industry. And many people make their living cutting down those forests and tearing, and other people make their living dragging fish out of those things. And there are people who love to hike in the woods and people who love to fish and contemplate. So we were asked to create fish forums around all the mouths of rivers in Northern California and bring together all these different people, the loggers and the environmentalists and the fish cannery workers and the motorcyclists, and talk about what to do about their river. Wow. So the first couple, we would come, people brought guns. And they wouldn't sit down, they would stare. And the meetings were held in these windowless, cheap motel rooms. The kind of conference rooms are just, and so the first one, it broke up early. The second one, it broke up early. By the third one, we at least had come up with the idea of having a map of the river up in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Which helped a little bit. By the fourth one, we asked people to introduce themselves by saying, tell us your name and what part of this river you love the most. And the transformation was amazing. Oh, that part? Yeah, that's where the logs all jam up in the spring. Oh, I love that part. And then all of a sudden, instead of people fighting with one another, you had people who understood they all loved the same thing. That was an important moment and reinforced for me the importance of this focused conversation method and also the importance of decor. Is that helpful?
Oh, yes. It touched me a lot, actually. I can imagine it. I'm visualizing the room when people really connect to each other, actually deep down. And it's not only the head is talking about what I want or, what is the benefit of this and of that. So you are connecting people by asking question of love. So that's how.
Of course. Now here's another story. Between 2006 and 2010, I was involved in a project called the 3000 Facilitators Project. And the idea was to combine technology of participation, top methods, with two other methods of facilitation to create an approach to conflict transformation that could be used to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So this was the project. And we developed a way of doing that. And then we went to Hamburg in Germany and invited some people from both sides of the conflict who were friendly to this approach, and invited some people from the university to have a nice big group. And I started off, and I was going to do part of it was what in the technology of participation we call a vision workshop. So I got up and I had people write ideas on cards and work in groups and bring their cards. And we started putting the cards up. And I read off this, and I don't know, I read off this card, 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 and I can feel coldness has come into the room.
Mhm.
Well, it turned out in context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there was a card here that wasn't allowed to be on the same board as a card here. And if this card stayed up, that half of the people were going to leave. And if this card stayed up, that half of the group was going to leave.
So
So I was defeated. I just said, well, let's take a break. Because that had never happened to me before. Because for the most part, in facilitating, I'm working with people who together want to figure something out. They're not that deeply in established concept. Anyway, it turned out that became a part of the method. That you would brainstorm and then you would identify, here's two cards that can't exist together. And you'd put them somewhere to come and deal with those in particular. Here's two cards that, and we'll go and deal with those together. So that was the other side. You can not only create a feeling of love, you can create a real feeling of cold.
but it's another way also to bring it to consciousness, the thing that exists in a way that how people deal with it. So it's what I learned from what you said. And Marilyn, I have the same question to you because we have only 18 minutes left. That is
Okay,
too fast.
I'll make a shorter story. I was going to talk about 2006 and 7, 8, 9, I don't know exactly how long, worked with the Central Arizona Project. This was also about water. The dilemma was, how will we share and pay for water in the future? So it's important to know we live in a desert and we get all of our water from the Colorado River. And there's always a question, why do we have the 5th largest city in the United States in a desert that has no water? So anyway, we had people from different parts of the state. We probably had 80 stakeholders and at least 50 different meetings to talk about how will we share and pay for water in the future. We did a study of what other places have done using the charting method of the technology of participation. We did a million focused conversations. We did workshops. I had people at the end of the process say, well, first of all, I would say I worked in partnership with someone from the International Association of Public Participation, and they have a step-by-step process for making decisions about like where to put a wastewater treatment plant, you know, what environmental kind of decisions. So we followed their steps, but inside those steps, we use technology participation facilitation methods. And someone at the end of the project said, I'm always grateful when I saw you coming because I knew that meant we'd be engaged. We'd be participating in these decisions. And that's what we invented in all of those meetings. We had task forces making scenarios. The end result, we came up with a consensus of these 80 different stakeholders. The board of directors for the Central Arizona Project agreed to the consensus. And then I'll tell you the rest of the story is the leadership of the organization changed, and I'm not just sure where it's gone now. But I do know that those persons involved knew that they had a voice and that they had participated in an important decision-making process. And we used all the tools we could find to engage them. So anyway, sometimes there were 5 or 6 or 8 of us facilitating a different sessions, or sometimes it was just you know, a couple of us, but we had a lot of people involved and a design that worked over all those sessions. So that's the story I'll tell. I mean, it made, I got a chance to see from start to finish how you make a change.
Thank you. We still have a lot of questions here that I may ask in order. Maybe, you know, yeah, okay. I have too many questions, actually. I have difficulty to choose. Wow.
Do you want help?
There is a question, what is a question, what is question, the answer of which is going to make a difference for all of humanity? Wow. Is there any hint?
No, but I think it's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And a lot of people answering. I don't have a response beyond that.
James?
I've already got it written down.
You have
These
something.
two are pretty good.
Yeah. So can you read it out loud? Read them out loud, please.
What will it take to release large amounts of sustained human energy towards significant social, meaning economic, political, and cultural change over the rest of this century? And how do we survive and thrive in the midst of this pandemic as we adapt to new awareness of our reality?
Wow. Did you know the question before? How did you prepare it?
He just carries those around in his head. He always has lots of them.
Well, it was either that or a Chinese dragon mask that I got at a yard sale was going to be behind me, so I decided. But I want to comment on Marilyn's, and I think it's the related line also to what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think in our profession, we have developed the skills and the methods and the approaches, mentoring, facilitation, consulting, and so forth and so on, to help people make good decisions. We have not yet implemented the different kind of organization and community that can really match that can really thrive on active participation. And you get a little bit of, I mean, look at governments. You get a little bit of participation and they start to go crazy. You get a plan for a bunch of stakeholders and the leadership changes. And part of it is pressure on leadership too. And the leadership changes and then they start over. So I think that's got to be, those of you who see another 20 or 30 years in the profession need to be thinking, how do we embed this? How do some of us take the risk and become organizational or community leaders and demonstrate how all this connects together, if we're going to have something sustainable for our children and grandchildren.
Thank you. Another questions. In early ICA, there was collective learning, applied research to be on the leading edge of thinking or practice. Where do you see this type of collective research and thinking happening today?
Oh, I want to talk about the facilitators and trainers who are now learning virtual tools. The pandemic obviously has limited the number of groups that come together face to face, but doesn't mean they no longer need to make decisions. So there are different groups who are testing out different virtual platforms, and they're sharing notes. They're saying, this is what you can do from this platform or this platform. There are different experiments in trying different ways of working with people virtually. It's not me, it's people who know technology far better than I do, but it's people who are also spending and investing a great deal of time. What I understand, when you do a virtual facilitation, it takes a long time to prepare all the boards, to prepare all the pieces, to make sure people can be engaged, that it can be as interactive as it would be if we're face to face. So I'm excited that trainers in the United States are working on that together in small teams, trying it out, testing it out. So that excites me. That's how these methods came into being from the very beginning. We try something out, we'd come back and debrief, and we'd say, okay, we're changing this next time. We try it out again, we'd come back and debrief. So always it was some kind of a collective process. And I see that very much alive right now in the new realm of virtual facilitation. I'm complete. I think Jim's back with a new camera.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard the question, Jim. You want me to repeat it?
No, I heard the question. I'm very excited that the degree to which those of you in this profession of facilitation connect and learn with one another. I remember being in Berlin and attending the open space community used to have bar nights once a week, I think on Tuesday nights, and everybody across Europe connected with open space community would get together and drink beer with one another and tell stories and talk. I know the International Association of Facilitators is involved in all kinds of conferences and gatherings and interchanges. And so I think that's an important place where this is going on as well.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I just want to say, I was one of the co-authors of a chapter on top in the Change Handbook. The first one had 18 methods. The next one had 60 methods. And the next one is ready to be coming out soon. And I have no idea how many methods are involved, but I just see that these methods are working together. They're supporting one another. That there's a lot of exploration going on and a lot of people tapping in on that set of resources in working with groups. So
it is 23 already. I see there are questions around top. I think that is another topic that we may take time to talk about it later on. To finish these conversations, I would like to ask you the question of, facilitation, what is it about, finally? And what keeps you going? You've been doing it for, I don't know for how long. What keeps you going? So I'm really curious to say, to hear from you. So what facilitation is about and what keeps you going for so long?
I will answer by saying I am number one, a snoop. I love getting a chance to go inside an organization, to talk with persons in the organization, to figure out what they're doing, how they're doing it, and then be able to leave. No, but I am deeply curious. I love to know how organizations work, how people work. I've done facilitations I counted this morning that I have a list of 250 facilitations I've done. They're every kind of group. So to be able to get a little sneak look inside what happens in organizations and how people thrive, where their passion is, what they're excited about, and to be able to serve them, to be able to offer them a way in which they can move from here to here, or they can resolve the conflict among the 7 different organizations of midwives in the United States. coming together to create a memorandum of how we'll get along, how we'll, I mean, just, I love meeting, working with, and just being curious about organizations. That keeps me going. But I stopped facilitating now because the body kind of wears out, the ears aren't so good, you know, stuff like that. So there's a whole younger generation now that's continuing. I'm complete.
Thank you. Same question for you, James. What is facilitation about and what keep you going for so long and so enthusiastic till today?
Facilitation is about releasing the ability of a group of people to take shared responsibility for what's going on in their lives and how to deal with it. And what keeps me going is the delight I take in watching the way people's spirit comes alive when they do that with one another, when they go, okay, we can take this on. Okay, we can do this. I'd be happy to share a link of a video that this training back in 2005 that Lon was involved in was in how to teach the group facilitation methods. And toward the end, all the participants go out and they teach on their own. They share these methods on their own. And then they come back and they tell stories. Oh, you should have seen the people. And what happens in the room when those stories come, it's just, I suppose it's like when a rock concert goes good. It's just so exciting. We've got some of that on video, but that, and then I stopped because now there are so many facilitators who are newer than I am and have a much different view of the future than I do. And so I step back to get out of their way because because that's what happened to me. When I started in this, there were people who understood this better than I did, and they knew how this stuff worked, and they were very good. And they stepped aside and said, let's give this person a chance to see what happens. And that's an important part of it too.
Thank you. I would like to ask all the participants, how many are joining us, Nicola?
So we had like during one moment 50%, 50%. And we have question about people who want to know what is the next, when is the next interview and how people can be alert about it.
Okay.
And yeah. Yeah, you see, we need to replan a new one.
Yeah, we will plan a new one into weeks time maybe. We will get you alert, you know, via the YouTube channel and also via social media.
I said on a chat, if you click on registered on the channel, YouTube channel, you have a button just here, left or right, I don't know.
Yeah.
On one side, you have a button to register. If you click on it, you will have a bell, and you have just to click on the bell to activate the notification. And when we will reprogram the next event, you will automatically get a notification on your YouTube account.
I would like to conclude our conversations with a question to all the participants today. What is the takeaway of these conversations? So please type down. What is the takeaway of these conversations? And I would do the same for us, Nicola and me, and if you'd like to join also Marilyn and James. I found out that my first project using facilitations, it is in water management in Vietnam. So somehow we are really connected. Marilyn, we are talking about water management and water. So it's something there. And I would finish with message. My son asked me, when you do this job after, like in very many times, after you retire, and then I say, I will not retire. In a way, I continue to do this job whenever I am and wherever I am. So, so that is one of the things that I discover. Nicola, what is the takeaway of this foundation then?
It's more like a feeling takeaway, because
Yeah.
you change all your life. You know that. You give this information, this knowledge, this way to act as a facilitator to so many persons around the world, and to Lan. And Lan, you give it to me, and I give it to other persons who will also give it to others and others. And it's just crazy, all what you did few years ago. So a big thank you.
Thank you.
You see the look on Nicola's face when he talks about that? That's what keeps me going. And even we should take a picture of that face and have facilitators practice that face, because that's if you put that face on right away, the whole group is participating better anyway.
Anything to say to finish, Marilyn?
Oh, I'm just excited to know that people are interested in these stories, and that the stories are continuing stories. You might say there used to be a game where you said a sentence and next person said a sentence and the next one said a sentence. I think Nikolai just described that. Jim and I started some stories, and you all have stories to tell, and new stories will be born. So I'm excited that it's evolving. That's my interest, that it keep growing and evolving.
Thank you very much. It's time to finish this conversation today. I'm really happy for the first one. I was nervous also, and I'm still nervous a bit. So, but sure, we will have the second and then the third, and after that, because it's not only in the European time zone. We will do it in Asia. We will do it in some other place also, because we have connections. We are, globe connection. So thank you all for this moment, and see you next time.
See you next time.
And thank you for inviting us, Lan and Nikolai. It's wonderful.
You're welcome. It was a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Tu peux couper le...
Oui, oui.
So, shall we leave now?
No,
Or
let's take